Hi, everyone, and thanks again for coming to another Authors of Google event from the San Francisco office. Today, we're very pleased to welcome Stephen Elliott to San Francisco. Stephen's a novelist. He's written 7 books, one of which includes his most recent book, The Adderall Diaries, which he'll be talking about today. His novel, Happy Baby, was the finalist for the New York Public Library's Young Lion Award, as well as Best Book of the Year in Salon.com, Newsday, Chicago New City, the Journal News, and the Village Voice. Stephen's writing has been featured in Esquire, The New York Times, The Believer, GQ, Best American Non-Required Reading for 2005 and 2007, Best American Erotica, and the Best Sex Writing of 2006. He was a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University and is a member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto, and he's also the editor of The Rumpus. Please welcome Stephen Elliott.
I wonder if it's possible to convince people to move up a little bit and sit over here maybe so we can have a little more of a conversation going on. I thought so I'll talk a little bit about my book, The Adderall Diaries, which you all get for free, which I think is it takes so much pressure off of me. I've been on this crazy book tour. I've been in 33 cities, and I did this thing. You guys can copy this if you want for your marketing strategy. But I let anybody that wanted to read a copy of the book get an advance copy for free. They just had to forward it within a week to the next reader. So 400 people signed up for that. The early reviews were really strong, and I was encouraged to do a bigger book tour. But I didn't want to, really. I mean, because it's my 7th book, and I know what it's like to show up in a small town and do a reading in the nice local bookstore to 10 people and then sleep in a crappy hotel, and it's just very lonely. And it can be soul-crushing even. And so instead, I sent a note to those 400 people, and I said I would do a reading in their home. Anybody wanted me to do a reading in their home, I would come and I would sleep on their couch, and I would read to their friends, and they would have to promise to get 20 people. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been crossing the country reading to groups of 20 people, generally none of whom have heard of me, because it's like the person that's invited me to their home has heard of me and read the book. It's not somebody I know, but there's somebody that's read the book. But then I'm just reading to their friends. Their friends are just coming to a party at the house, and they tend to go to 1 in the morning because nobody leaves a reading in a home. It's a party kind of, and I think now I'll never have stage fright again, because I'm selling books like Tupperware to people I've never met, and I'm stuck there. I can't leave. I got to sleep on their couch, and so to read to an audience of people that already has the book, and I don't have to sell you the book. I'd like to convince you to read it, and maybe get an extra copy to give a Christmas present, but I feel like the pressure's kind of off. So this is a story that, in a way, there is actually an intersection with Google in a way, because the book, I'll give a brief description. I'd had writer's block for a year and a half or 2 years, and I've always written. I've written since I was 10 years old. And I'd write to communicate. I used to write poems when I was literally 11 years old. I had poems wallpapering my room. I was in this, my mother was dying. It was a very abusive home. And then eventually the state took custody of me, and I was in group homes, and I would just write poems and stories all the time. And I've always written to communicate. And then I got this really bad case of writer's block, which I think was in part because I'd started making a living as a writer. And so now those expectations, and I didn't know how to do that. It wasn't something I'd ever set out to do. So I just started, after a year or 2 years, I went back on Adderall, which I had taken when I was younger. You guys know what Adderall is? It's like Ritalin. It's an ADD medication. It's basically pure amphetamine, but we prescribe it to young children. And I just started documenting going back on Adderall. Right about that time, Sean Sturgeon confessed to 8.5 murders. How many people here know who Sean Sturgeon is? You don't know who he is because there was a gag order. I'm going to tell you, Sean Sturgeon is best friends with Hans Reiser, who was on trial for murdering his wife, Nina Reiser. Hans Reiser created a file system for Linux, which he in fact came to Google and did one of these presentations about his file system. And so that's the intersection with Google and the file system. Have you heard of the Hans Reiser trial? That was a giant trial, right? Wired blogged it. So Nina left Hans for Sean, and they couldn't find the body. And Sean confessed to 8.5 murders. And so you would think that he would be a suspect. And of course he was. He was investigated pretty extensively, and there was a gag order on that, so that the Chronicle couldn't write about it. And I'm going to get 1 second. And then Sean and I our lives had overlapped quite a bit. We knew a lot of people in common, and in 1999, I'd done a bondage photo shoot in his apartment, which he had rented out to professional dominatrixes as dungeon space. And I won't even go into all the details, but our lives we had really overlapped quite a bit. And so I started looking into that, and that led me to the Hans Reiser trial. And that's the book, kind of. But there's quite a bit more, actually. Turns out in 200 pages you can fit a lot. You have a question?
I was asking, what's a half a murder?
Half a murder. Well, originally I thought it was he didn't know if the person was dead. But when I actually got the confessions, when I got the entire investigation into Sean Sturgeon, it turns out the half murder was that he didn't know if she was dead when he found her or if he killed her. So it's the first murder when he was very young. So that's so Sean Sturgeon was kind of the untold story. Ultimately, this book, though, it's not about Sean Sturgeon, and it's not really about Hans Reiser either. There is the full Hans Reiser story is in this book, and there is a full true crime book within the Adderall Diaries. But really, it's a memoir, and more specifically, it's really a book about writing and being a writer. And the file system turns out to be a really potent metaphor, because the file system is really the most human part of the computer. It's the identity of the computer. It's how the computer organizes its memories. And that's who we are. We're a series of memories and interpretations of those memories. So I thought I'll read that part maybe where I first find out about Sean's confession, and I'm going to read I'll read one short section, and then we can do some Q&A if you guys have any questions, and then maybe I'll read another section, and then we can do a little more Q&A. So this section should take about 8 minutes. The morning after the fight, I get a call from Josh, a staff writer at Wired magazine. He's working on a profile of Hans Reiser, a brilliant computer programmer accused of killing his estranged wife. I helped Josh track down Hans' former best friend, Sean Sturgeon. Sean and I have several girlfriends in common, and I once did a bondage photo shoot in his apartment when he wasn't home. When I say girlfriends, I don't mean that we were engaged with the same women, just that we had girls who were friends. Legally, since this is being videotaped, I should be clear about this. I don't remember ever meeting him, but our paths have crossed so many times it almost doesn't make sense. Josh is calling to say he found out something incredible about the case. Your guy, Sean, just confessed to 8 murders, maybe 9. Why maybe 9? He isn't sure if one of the victims is dead. Josh says Sean's not under arrest, and he's refusing to tell the district attorney the names of the people he killed. Sean told Josh that he confessed to the DA because he's a born-again Christian and thought the jury would want to know. It seemed the right thing to do, or rather, He poses a question. Don't you think the jury would want to know? But then he said Hans knew about his murders, and he was confessing in order to beat Hans to the punch. Maybe he confessed for both reasons. Or maybe he confessed for reasons that had nothing to do with Reiser or the jury. He denied having anything to do with Hans' wife's disappearance. He told Josh, give me some sodium pentanol or any truth serum, put a little ecstasy in there, and ask me if I killed Nina. I have never been a threat to her. Sean told the police and the district attorney that his victims had physically and sexually abused him and his sister in the East Bay commune where they were raised. He claimed he hadn't killed anyone since 1996. The commune interests me. I know the places where adults come in conflict, I know the places where adults come in contact with unsupervised children. Between 14 and 18, I was in 5 different state-funded child care facilities, including 3 group homes, a mental hospital, and a temporary youth shelter that stuffed 30 children into each room. In those places, you can never tell who to trust. When I'm done talking to Josh, I feel like I'm waiting for something. The group homes were a long time ago. It's still morning, and I put a pot of water on the stove. I call Josh back and ask him for Sean's phone number. If Sean committed 8 murders, it's a huge story. I think, here is a man willing to wait years to get revenge on the people who stole his childhood. I think of In Cold Blood and The Executioner's Song, 2 of my favorite books, both set around spectacular murders and written by novelists. I know people who have known Sean for more than a decade. I have the inside track, and there's something else about the case. Nina Reiser's body was never found. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't know if Sean will talk to me. If he did kill 8 people, surely the police would have arrested him by now. And why isn't he a suspect in the disappearance of Nina Reiser? After calling Sean and leaving a message, I bicycled through the city, down Market, toward the Castro, my right pant leg rolled up so as not to get caught in the chain. My bicycle is my prized possession. An old Peugeot I picked up for $150 9 years ago. I live a spare existence. I haven't owned a car since I first got to this city. I cut right past the gay and lesbian center and the $3 bill cafe. Something's tugging on me. I had heard of Nina's murder, but never the full story. I had heard about Sean and how Nina's disappearance crushed him. He took to bed, paralyzed with grief. He was in love with his best friend's wife. It was all just passing information. But 8 murders? Revenge killings? 8 murders isn't revenge. 8 murders is a serial killer. I go to the park to meet a girl I know. Someone who has taken a habit of coming to my readings. She's engaged and lives with her fiancé between the Marina and Russian Hill. I've only seen her once before, and she'd explained their relationship. It was simple. He was monogamous and believed in monogamy. She cheated on him and always would. She arrives, it's very San Francisco, I think. She arrives wearing a black dress and sandals. Her skin is so pale, all I can think of is milk. I don't think of my complicity in her unfaithfulness. I don't want to. I don't love her. She's just someone I know. I wait as she walks across the grass in her sandals. A man stops her and asks if she is willing to be in one of his paintings. She talks with him for a moment, her head turned his way, her body pointing toward me. He doesn't have any paint. He wears dark, heavy clothes, his belongings bound in garbage bags around him. The sun is brilliant, and the colorful houses are brightly lit along the hills. On some days, the fog catches on their drain pipes like cotton. But today, it's easy to see why people want to live here. Easy to see San Francisco for the gentle paradise it is. We lie in the grass with my shirt pulled up. I forget all about De La Hoya's fight and Sean Sturgeon's confession. I ask her to pinch my nipple, and she does, but it isn't enough. I ask her to do it harder, and soon there is blood everywhere. There are people nearby, but they don't seem to notice. For most of it, she keeps her hand over my mouth, and I close my eyes and drift away. It's okay, she says. That's only half the day. There's a barbecue, and then a reading, And then a party, there's always a party. I dance with a girl. How do you know Eric, I ask between songs. I don't, she says. My boyfriend knows him. I dance better after that. It's still a weekend after all. It's still San Francisco. Everything is beautiful. Really, it seems perfect. The DJ looks like Napoleon Dynamite and spins pop songs from the 80s on vinyl. I'm 35 years old. The woman I'm dancing with has curly black hair and moves with steady grace, her silk dress rolling in waves down her arms. I feel loose and fine. I take $5 from another writer who put his money inexplicably on De La Hoya. Always bet on youth, I tell him. It's 1 a.m. I don't imagine anything can ever go wrong. So that's that section. I'll keep a little timepiece over here so I know where we're at. Does anybody have any questions on anything? Anything? Yes.
I'm curious in general how much of this book is it all nonfiction, or is any of it stuff you've taken artistic liberty with?
No, it's all nonfiction. I don't take artistic liberty. Let me read the disclaimer. How about that? There's a disclaimer. A book, when you write a memoir is an exercise in a kind of a radical honesty. You have to be willing to explore yourself and really question your own motivations. If you're really trying to write and create a work of art, you shouldn't know where you're going. If you know the answers already, then why bother? Why bother writing it? So you find out things, but of course, when people in the same room having the same experience will remember these things differently. A lot of the book concerns my father, and I'd left home very young, and we were at odds over what had happened. He would leave bad reviews of my books on Amazon. I mean, we had a toxic relationship. There's a copy of one of those reviews in the book, because I would write books set in group homes, and that would make him look bad. And I had a memory of being an abused child and leaving home. He had a memory of a spoiled son who could have come home anytime he wanted. So ultimately, I had to accept that his memories were valid. They're valid because to lie requires intent. You can't accidentally lie. You can be wrong, but the rule of a memoir is you can't intentionally lie. But this idea of a truth, it's very fluid. Do you remember that? Is that your interpretation? I would never present a false conclusion. For example, there's a fair amount of the book that's dealing with these romantic relationships where I'm unable to achieve a solid, stable romantic relationship. And it would work so well narratively if I just finished the book with, and then, I met a nice girl and we moved in together and we figured it out. But that's not life. Things don't wrap up that easily. I know someone who did a memoir like that, and now the book's coming out a year later and she's already broken up with a guy. You don't want to do that. So that's what I mean by a radical honesty. You have to be open to things. But here's a disclaimer. This is a work of nonfiction. Situations may have appeared in other works in different forms and significantly different context. Characters are not conflated, so characters are not combined into one character. Events are sometimes presented out of sequence, but timelines are not intentionally altered. Many names and details have been changed to protect identities, so that's really significant. Of course, much is based on my own memories and is faithful to my recollections, but only a fool mistakes memory for fact. One more thing about honesty, I think of it as when you're in your early 20s and you break up you have this relationship and it ends because that person lied to you or because you lied to them. I mean, everybody had that relationship in their early 20s, right? Either you were the liar or you were lied to. But then later you realize that nobody lied to anybody. You just didn't know yourself well enough to be honest. you didn't know yourself well enough to present what you wanted and ask for it, and so the other person felt lied to because they thought you had hidden your desires, but actually you just didn't have the necessary self-knowledge. And that's the thing about a memoir. It's not about just not lying. It's more about finding out these things, knowing yourself well enough to be honest. I mean, that's the challenge of the memoir. That was a long answer, but there you have it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Touching on that again, I don't know if you read The Night of the Gun.
I did read The Night of the Gun by David Carr.
It's always as interesting because he comes in as well in his 50s, so he has a good job of uncovering the truth.
It's really interesting. The thing about The Night of the Gun by David Carr, this memoir that came out last year, this comes out a lot. This is a really fun and interesting memoir, right? And I loved it. He interviews all of his friends and basically uses their quotes to tell his story. The problem with The Night of the Gun, and this is not David Carr's fault, but it's everybody else's fault, that people say, well, this is the new memoir. This is how you write something true. But it's not more true. In fact, it's less true. I mean, nobody remembers your life better than you do. And if you interview all of your friends and then use their quotes, you could create anything out of that. Your friends actually, my friends don't remember me as a coward. I have to admit to being a coward, to doing the wrong. Your friends don't think of you that way. If I want, I could interview all my friends and present this very happy and strong person. I could present you with an entirely different person, all through quotes. And I've even done a series of interviews with my friends. I mean, it's good to interview people, and they spark it. I have been doing this project called An Oral History of Myself, where I interview at length people that I grew up with. We did a lot of them because it was group homes. So some of the places I was in, there was like 30 guys to a room. And I interview them, the stories they remember. They remember us getting in fights together, like back to back, like Batman and Robin. People do not remember, your memories are more true for your experience than their memories are. And the author has to really be the one taking the hard look. Nobody else was paying as much attention to you as you were paying to yourself. So it's just not more true. It's an incredibly compelling book and really well written. But I don't think that that's a good model in terms of like a more true memoir. It's not more true, but it's super fun to read. It's extremely well written. Any other questions? Okay. Maybe I'll see how much time I have. Maybe I'll just read just one more section, because this section will take about 12 minutes, and then maybe I'll read two, but we can do some more questions after this. But this is from the verdict, which is not the end of the book by a long shot. So don't worry about that, because ultimately the book is about a lot more than the Hans Reiser trial. You're too late, a woman tells me, on the first floor of the courthouse. It's one of the producers from 2020. She's pregnant with twins, and she's waiting near the information desk. Oh, again, this is like 12 minutes. I said it already. I like to so everybody kind of expectations. She's hoping to catch some jurors on their way out. I bolt up the stairs and emerge from the fifth floor stairwell into a scrim of boom mics and tripods. The vestibule is packed to the walls with local and national media outlets. In the short hallway to the restroom, the video techs are replaying the verdict on the double monitor. The on-air talent are already relaying their stories back to the viewing audience. The cameramen wrangling long coils of electrical cord. I crouch beneath the water fountains near the machine where the professionals redub beta tapes. There are agreements already in place between broadcasting companies for pool cameras. The producers are whispering, trying to keep secrets from each other. The union crews hustle to stay busy and earn a spot on the next job. I'm thankful for their monitors. 2 small screens sitting on top of the series of beams with wheels full of media decks, cassettes popping out like toaster waffles. It's the first time Goodman has allowed cameras in his courtroom. One in the front row of the gallery, another from the witness stand, staring at all the participants. I ignore what's going on around me and focus instead on the screen. Inside courtroom 9, every seat is taken, and a large crowd stands back near the doors. The bailiffs make no move to clear people who are unable to find seats. Hans, Dubois, and Hora sit at the long table in the center. Dubois is sad, his cheeks seeming to slide from his jaw, eyes drawn and bewildered. He knows the jury is coming back too soon. Hans looks like he was yanked out of bed, the top button undone on his shirt, his thick red tie hanging loosely from his collar, begging to be tightened. He leans toward Dubois, whispering in his ear as the jury files behind them, settling into 2 rows of seats out of view of the cameras facing the accused. Juror number 1 is chosen as the foreman. I remember him listening closely during Corey's testimony, nodding and encouraging the boy, smiling thoughtfully as the child squirmed uncomfortably on the stand. He gives the bailiff a note, which the bailiff then walks over to Judge Goodman. The judge opens the envelope, reads it, hands it back to the bailiff. The bailiff returns the note to the foreman. Does that represent your true and final verdict? Goodman asks. Each juror says yes in their turn. Murder in the first degree, premeditated with malice. Bailiff, remove Mr. Reiser from the courtroom. I shift from one leg to another while watching. There's commotion behind me, heels clicking rapidly against the linoleum, but on the screen, the court is stunned silent. I've been the best father I know how, Hans says. He has more to say, but he doesn't get a chance. The bailiff taps him on the shoulder, grips his arm at the elbow and wrist, pulls him from the room. He will no longer be granted the courtesy of the accused. The holding cell door closes in front of Hans, his mouth still open. The judge thanks the jury for their service. The camera focuses on Paul Hora, leaning back at the table, folding his hands together. Dubois shuffles a folder into a briefcase. I watch the verdict again, but now from another angle. The view from the witness stand. Each juror answers affirmatively. This case has aged Dubois. He's a highly regarded defense attorney, and I've come to like him immensely, even if I never believe a word he says. The camera drops to an empty trash bin beneath the table, a bag folded loosely around its rim, then rises again to his face, then Hans. Hans looks stunned as the clerk reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder on or about September 3rd, 2006, in the county of Alameda. Hans Reiser did, and with malice, murder Nina Reiser. I've been the best father I know how." The bailiff stands ready behind Hans, taps him on the shoulder, leads him forcefully from the room. "Can you rewind?" I say. "Play it again?" There are press conferences. Dubois promises appeals. Horace says justice has been served. The jurors slip out a side door. Late in the afternoon, the building is mostly empty. I look in on courtroom 9. Boxes of tape, documents, and displays sit at the front of the room. The jury hardly requested any of it, and now it will have to be stored somewhere. The transcripts of phone calls Hans made to his mother and pleading voicemails left for Nina, the photographs of Nina and the children and her blood sprayed across the beam, swabs, DNA lab results, recordings, videos, maps charting Hans' routes through the East Bay as he tried to evade the police, receipts for a water pump, for books about murder, testimony from social workers, doctors, financial records, everything that went into the story Paul Hora wrote for the jury, having served its purpose. I meet a friend near the courthouse. She's a professor of political science at Berkeley. We drive south and find a restaurant in a residential district nestled between the hills and the freeway leading onto the bridge. I have a beer, then another. I tell her what Hans said, his last words before he was led away. He said, "I've been the best father that I know how." "By killing their mother?" she asks. "It was as if he was talking to me," I say. "Does he know you're writing a book?" "I doubt it." Hillary Clinton is on the television above the bar. A scroll runs below her chin, repeating an earlier statement about what would happen to Iran if Israel were attacked. She says Iran would be obliterated. It's nearing the end of the Democratic primaries, and it occurs to me that for the last 5.5 months, I've hardly thought about anything except Hans Reiser. I haven't been following the news or playing cards. For more than 2 years, I went to my friend's house every Sunday night to watch television. But during the trial, my friends had a baby, and we stopped doing that. I saw the baby once and held her awkwardly, terrified I'd drop her as she made circles with her tiny mouth. She was a colicky baby, but recently she stopped crying. The trial is over. You seem excited, my friend says. We're outside on the sidewalk near an ice cream shop and a closed-down bookstore. There are lots of lights and teenagers everywhere. In the morning, I'm back in court, mildly hungover. Hans is there, but doesn't get to say anything. The judge schedules the sentencing. Murder 1 is a mandatory 25 years to life. Dubois asks for some words with his client. The two men lean toward each other like lovers. They pat each other's arms, whispering. Hans spreads his fingers over Dubois' shoulder, reassuring him until Hans is taken from the room and returned to his cell. What now? I say to one of the reporters. I'm so glad to be done with this bullshit, he replies. When Hans said, I've been the best father that I know how, he meant that he did it for his children, more specifically for his son. I remember his testimony. The thing the jury absolutely had to know was that Nina didn't love Corey after the divorce. He interrupted his own lawyer to say that when Nina informed him she was leaving, she also switched her affections from Corey to Lila. Hans said it was important to understand that Nina changed this way. Otherwise, it would seem like he was contradicting himself and nothing would add up. None of us knew what he was talking about. I shook my head and whispered to one of the journalists, what is he referring to? He's gone off the rails, he whispered back. But we were wrong. We were ignoring something consequential. The lattice of justifications a murderer assembles as he builds towards the crime. In one of the key pieces of evidence, the wiretapped phone call to his mother 3 weeks after Nina was murdered, Hans said she came up with these illnesses for Corey because she hated me. Corey understands his mother wants him to be sick and doesn't really like him on some deep conflicted level. Hans sounded tired in that call, depressed, explaining to his mother that Nina was killing his son. On Friday, September 1st, the last weekday before he killed Nina, Hans called District Supervisor Gail Steele. He wanted to know what she thought of his proposal to overhaul the child welfare system. Hans was certain the supervisor would take his proposal seriously. He had donated $2,000 to her campaign, but after calling 6 times that week, 4 times that day, he never called her again. The bureaucracy would not bend to his will, so he took care of the problem himself. He did it to save his son. Except he didn't. Nina had been with Hans for 5 years. She knew Hans better than anybody, and she left him for his only friend. This is the moment, Hans told the jury, when she ceased loving their son. In fact, it's the moment when Hans realizes Nina doesn't love him, and maybe she never did. His mind went searching for a reason. Surely she understood he was a famous computer programmer. Her rejection wasn't consistent with the identity he had built for himself. He had to reorganize the data. It was too much to take, and he gave it to his son to carry. When Hans said, I've been the best father that I know how, he meant I killed the mother to save the boy. When I asked my father why he moved while I was sleeping on the streets, he said I was a drug addict, so he abandoned me for the good of the family. That was the story he put together, the opposite of the story I had put together about being an abused child. But some large part of me hadn't wanted things to work out. Even then, I despised him for screaming. I disapproved of the way he led his life. He never hit me until after I left home and brought shame on him. I rejected my father. There was only my father and my sister would be in college soon. My grandparents were dead. My mother's family was in England, and my father moved and wouldn't tell me where he went. The family my father left me for didn't exist. He was referring to the family he didn't have yet. The family coming soon. The family hoped for, or not. He was referring to himself. All systems of domination create stories of their own benevolence. The imperialists arrive to tame the savage. We tie the noose around Saddam Hussein's neck, place a bag over his head, the floor swings open beneath his feet, and his dead body hangs in the gallows. I was traveling in 2004 with President Bush 3 days after the pictures were published of Abu Ghraib. He stood near third base in a Little League stadium and gave the same speech he gave in every city, except right in the middle of his speech, he slid in one extra sentence. He said, "Thanks to our actions, Saddam's torture chambers have been closed." Did he just say what I think he said? I asked the reporter next to me. The crowd cheered. They had no idea he was saying this for the first time. They thought it was part of the speech, but it wasn't. It was the official response to evidence to the contrary. Hans Reiser killed Nina because she rejected him, but he will never know that. Something so selfish is beyond knowing. My father abandoned me to the streets because I had no forgiveness in me. I was 11, 12, 13, 14, and I sat in judgment of my father, so he left me sleeping in some hallway and got a new house. Those people in that stadium were concerned with a picture of a soldier giving the thumbs up next to the body of a man packed in ice, beaten to death by American soldiers. We were taking our revenge. Revenge for what? They rejected us. That's what. We respond with the violent indignation of colonizers. We understand the world by how we retrieve memories, reorder information into stories to justify how we feel. Thanks to our actions, Saddam's torture chambers are now closed. I did it for the good of the family. I've been the best father that I know how. Thank you. The rest of the book is funny. Any more questions about memoir writing or Hans Reiser or... Yes?
So, do you tell people in your life that you're writing about them before or after you write about them?
Well, that's complicated. So the question is, do I tell people in my life that I'm going to write about them prior to writing about them? There's several different situations to think about here. All right, so the first, I'm meeting someone I don't know, like Sean Sturgeon, right? I meet him, when I contact Sean Sturgeon, it's as a writer who is considering writing about him. I don't know for sure, but, I'm completely upfront. I'm not like, hey, we know some people in common. You want to get pizza? I'm like, I'm a writer, and I'm looking into this topic. So I'm always open, right? Now, but then... So that's someone you don't know. But then you're really asking about the people you do know. The problem there is I don't know if I'm going to write something until later, right? I have an intense, something happens with a friend. We have or a girlfriend. That's a better example where you have an intense emotional situation that's really defining and important to you. And then you end up writing about it. So my basic, I can't ask, can I write about this? Because I don't know I'm going to write about it until I've already written it. 90% of what I think I might write, I don't write. So there's not even, why even ask permission? Because you'd be asking permission for all these things and that I'm not even going to end up writing anyway. So then you write it. My rule, my lines, are that I would change that person's identity so they would not be recognizable to their employer or to their friends, for example. That's my line. Like when you're a writer, you have to come up with your own lines. You're responsible for your actions. So you have to say, I can live with this. It's not defensible. I'm not saying this is okay or not okay. People have a right to be upset about being written about. I mean, unless you were explicitly contacted by a writer looking to write about you and you spoke to that person, in which case you have no right to be upset. And that's most people, actually. But I'll give you another situation. I had coffee one time with a girl, a good friend, and she told me this story. She was a professional dominatrix, and a client came to see her who looked just like her father. and she had a very bad relationship with her father. And I ended up, and then so she saw him for a year, and then one day just beat the hell out of him. And of course, at that point, he wanted to see her all the time, but she didn't want to see him again after that. She was disturbed by the situation and never saw him again. I ended up writing like a 12,000-word essay structured around that story. I didn't know, when she was telling me this story, I didn't know I was going to write it down or that it was going to impact, but it just stayed with me, and eventually I wrote it out. I felt that was her story. She was having dinner or coffee with me as a friend, not as a journalist. She didn't know I was thinking about writing about her. I didn't either. So I asked her permission. Now, if I'm part of the story, I don't need permission, in my opinion. That's just this is only opinions. This is all gray area. But if it's someone else's story and I can't really change it significantly, but I have to present it the way they told it, I wanted her permission to use it. She said, well, she would like to see the piece, so I showed her the piece, and she said she was okay. I mean, I don't name her or anything like that. But if she had not been okay, I wouldn't have published it. So I felt that was her story. So, but it's not necessarily, dating a writer, is a dangerous thing. Because writers tend to use their life in their work. I would never give someone a promise that I would not write about them. I would promise that I would change their identity and make them unrecognizable, but I would never promise somebody that I'm never going to write about our experiences together. I can't promise that ever. Is there any more questions? Yes.
I have a question about writing style. So since you're living the story, you have all the details and you can kind of reimagine the story as you're reading it. For your readers, how do you know which details to include and not to include? I just thought it was really interesting, you're telling your narrative and then you mentioned something about Hillary Clinton being on TV. How do you decide what's important to include and what adds to the story and what to leave out?
The question is about what to include and what to leave out and writing style. Elmore Leonard said, writing is about cutting out the boring parts. And so that's the main thing, right? Whenever you're writing, you have a certain amount of tension, and it's like a bank account. You've built up tension because people are waiting for some kind of conclusion. They have questions in their mind. Someone's following somebody else, things like that. Or in a memoir, they're with you on this quest. You're searching for things, and so there's some tension. And then when you're in the editing process and you're rereading, I have hundreds of drafts of this book, and anything I write, I have hundreds. I compulsively rewrite everything every book. So if I read something 30, 40, 50 times, and around the 50th time I'm reading something, I find myself skipping over a paragraph, I know I have to cut that paragraph, right? Because if I'm not looking forward to reading that paragraph where it bores me, then it has to go. And that's the process of writing. The process of writing is rewriting. So you continually, this book will be 1,000 pages. It's a very heavily edited book. So you come to terms with what you have in the bank, how much of the reader's attention you think you have. Now my reader, I know my reader's attention because my reader likes the same books I like. I'm trying to write my favorite book. And the people that like to read what I like, I'm trying to write their favorite book. I'm not trying to write a book for, a soccer mom in Tennessee. If we're similar, that's great, but I'm not trying to target a demographic that I don't consider myself a part of or that I look down on. A lot of times people talk about writing for an audience, and they're really talking about writing for someone that they don't think highly of. They're talking about targeting people that they don't respect, and I don't do that at all. So my audience, I think of my audience as smart and with a short attention span, but intellectual, that wants to be challenged a little bit, and that's the audience I'm writing for. And I want my only goal is to write their favorite book, So that's kind of the answer to that question, I think. Does that make sense?
Totally, thanks.
And is that a good time to end it on? And then we're gonna end it on that question, and I'm gonna have a Google lunch now, so we can continue talking over Google lunch if you want. Thanks for coming out, everybody.